Hello and welcome to the Wellbeing Evolution. This video is a kind of response video to, it's more than just one specific video. Having said that, I saw a post, I guess you could say, by quite a high profile scientist recently who had a guest on that was talking about human nature. And he framed human nature primarily as resentful, greedy, and selfish. And it might kind of be amusing to suggest that, but if we take that seriously, which I think a lot of people do, and I think in many ways a lot of the kind of reductionist scientific community keep on sort of proposing that as the baseline of what human beings are. There's implications to that, there's results to that in terms of how we view each other and then how we anticipate and respond and behave and set up our environment. So it's way more serious than making a kind of, well, it's reductionist and it's implying this, it's an implication that it's to do with our survival. And that's just simply not true in terms of research, which I will kind of describe to some degree. And I'm also going to put citations of various research projects, ethnographic studies, etc., that have concluded that in no way can we describe human beings' nature as being selfish or being greedy and resentful. So part of the reason I feel it's a serious claim that should be pushed back is because if we look at the news, for instance, now we see war, we see genocide, or we see corruption, etc., and we're like, why is this happening again? You know, why is it that human beings keep on doing this? And there are kind of, I would say, very well researched reasons for why we're doing it. And it's not a case of human nature. It's a case of human potential and capacity. Yes, of course, because it's being manifested in front of us. But that doesn't suggest necessarily that it's the norm or that it's inevitable. So in terms of research then, I'm going to refer to some fairly well-known studies. So Frans de Waal, who's a primatologist, he studied the reaction to unfair treatment or imbalanced treatment with, primates in terms of like how much food they got in reference to others, in comparison to others. And it was seen that they did not like it. In fact, some primates would refuse to take the food that they'd been offered when they'd seen that other primates had not been given the same. And then there is Jerome and Ingrid Lewis, who are ethnographers who have studied tribes in, I believe, Africa and the Congo. And what they found, looking at these hunter-gatherer tribes that are still living in the way that we did for hundreds of thousands of years, seemingly at least. And what they found was that overwhelmingly, the culture within those tribes was one that promoted, benevolence, being generous, sharing. And in fact, what they found was that it was very common that if someone was to hold on to something and grasp onto it and grasp onto resources and not share what was available for others that needed it, it was considered some kind of mental illness, something that there was something wrong with them, that they would do that. It was not seen as someone being smart or savvy to be holding on to resources. And there are other examples. There was a group of children, I believe, or kind of early teens in the 60s that were in a plane crash. And unfolded in terms of their survival. They kept each other alive. I can't remember the number of them. It wasn't a high number. I think it was like 8 or 9. You could Google that, find out yourselves. But it was the opposite of the Lord of the Flies situation, essentially. The William Golding novel. They looked out for each other. They self-organized. I believe one of them broke their leg, and they all came together and worked out, how to kind of model a splint and support him and heal him back to health. There wasn't this kind of concept that we always have about, a dominant alpha male having to emerge. And even in primate studies, what's found with that is that the dominant alpha male, especially in more sophisticated primate groups, they're not the biggest and the strongest necessarily. That may intersect. But what's overwhelmingly the quality of that alpha male is that they're capable of maintaining and cultivating allied relationships, and they're trusted, and they're seen to be affectionate. They're seen to be collaborative in that sense. It's not about just dominating and holding power in that sense. So we've also got the implications of what does it mean if you see your neighbor as greedy, selfish, and resentful? Because there are reactions to that. If you look around the world and you see nations with that kind of characteristic, especially as a dominant characteristic, what do? You batten down the hatches. You stop kind of open relations. There's a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of legislation becomes really enforced, and kind of the sharing of resources, etc., on a microcosmic and a macrocosmic scale are both reflected in that. And then, of course, you've got to ask, if we're viewing each other like that, who benefits? Because there's a certain system that benefits from us seeing each other as selfish and greedy and a risk, or a potential kind of let's say opportunistic kind of view of our resources from the outside. So you lock your doors, you don't speak to strangers, you always make checks, the openness starts to become very kind of retracted and contracted in that sense. We have to ask that question. And there are aspects of war then. I mentioned war. Why has it got anything to do with war? If you view a nation with those qualities, it's very easy for those who want to start and perpetuate wars to manufacture the consent from the population, because the population feel the fear, they contract, they want a solution, and so they're much more likely to consent to war, to military measures in general. And that's been the case for hundreds of years now. In fact, if you look at this statement, for instance, of the Roman Empire, when they were trying to kind of get consent from the population for why they should invade Northern Europe, it was all about, there's dangerous groups, there's dangerous tribes up there, and we need to defend our allies, etc. And what was the actual condition and motivation for it? Go and grab some gold, because the Roman Empire were running out of gold. In fact, if you look at the statement that was made to justify the Iraq invasion in the 90s and the early 2000s, they're almost word for word the same as the Romans' statement that they put out to the people, to the citizens. So there are kind of classic tropes that are put out there in order to maintain and gain consent from the population. So, of course, the pushback on this would be, yeah, see, it's always been there through the ages. That is the nature of human beings. Okay, well, my pushback on that would be, we're talking about potential, not nature. And the analogy that I think fits quite well would be a kind of oncology analogy, which is that the nature of cells, for instance, is that they overwhelmingly are trying to contribute to the system and to their function in a harmonious way. But if you introduce a toxic environment, or the transcription and translation of DNA, etc., is compromised, or is kind of, the coding of it, so to speak, is collapsing, then you get a problem within the system, within the biological system. It's not the nature of it. It's not how it should be. It's not how it's kind of, let's say, proportionally speaking, most cells are functioning very well in reference to the wider system. So it's not the nature of those cells. And in the same way, if we introduce the toxicity of viewing each other as selfish, as viewing the world and each other as potential resources or not, and that's the limitation of it, then you start to introduce essentially a carcinogen into the social environment. And I would say that the statements that human beings are selfish, resentful, and greedy as a baseline, rather than a potential for when the individuals are stressed, the individuals are fearful, the individuals are broken or feel broken away from certain parts of the group, which is a classic kind of parallel to senescence of cells, and then the development of tumors, etc. They are running wild by themselves in that sense. Like they're not working with the system. So I think, in conclusion, my point is not against necessarily the individual, because the scientists that were saying that then concluded towards the end that it's all about love. It's all about kind of the primary environment that one needs to put oneself in terms of longevity and well-being is one of quality kind of interactions with others and a loving, close relationships, which I don't oppose at all. I agree, but the idea that it's somehow some sort of modern innovation to view human beings or to try and cultivate a behavior towards human beings that's from a loving place because science says so. Well, no, human nature says so. And as I say, there's overwhelming evidence to say that our natural disposition is one of harmony, is one of generosity, and is one of affection and caring and love. That's really where we're coming from. That's the baseline. The other stuff is just the obscurations to it. It's a complete inversion of the kind of reductionist scientific perspective on human beings that is often cited, let's say. So yeah, that was my kind of rant over. Thanks for listening, if you did.